Shalom and welcome back to Israel with Aline. Did you know that Jesus and his apostles never ate tomatoes, corn, or potatoes, and that King David never drank coffee? So what did people actually eat and drink in biblical times? Today we're going to prepare a complete biblical meal to try to answer the question, if you sat at the table with Jesus, what would actually be on your plate? So if you're ready, let's get started. The meal we're going to prepare today is not a banquet or a festive meal. We want to find out what people actually ate in their daily lives, their everyday food. Because back then there was a lot of variation. For example, the rich had access to imported foods that the common people of Galilee and Judea wouldn't have. We have a great example of this in King Herod the Great, who was ruling when Jesus was born. In the archaeological excavations carried out at Masada, next to King Herod's palace, food storages were found, and that's how we know exactly what Herod ate. And what was found in these excavations? They found jars full of wine remnants, but it was wine imported from Italy. They also found apples brought from Italy, and it doesn't stop there. They found garum fish sauce, an expensive sauce brought from Spain. And we believe that, in fact, King Herodes might have eaten peacock. We also have records from historians who lived in that time, like Pliny the Elder, who says that the aristocracy, the wealthiest people of that time, at big parties and banquets, they served peacock. They would roast the whole animal, and once it was ready, decorate it with the peacock's feathers. But of course, the people who listened to Jesus, who followed him, didn't have access to these luxurious and extravagant foods. And that's why our challenge for today is really to put together a meal just like Jesus would have eaten, like the people who lived with him were used to. And now, yes, let's start preparing our meal. And for that, I brought my market cart here, because now we're going together to Mahane Yehuda, the most important food market in all of Jerusalem, where we'll have access to all the foods and ingredients just like in biblical times. Let's go. In our meal for the first course as an appetizer, we're going to have a lentil stew. This was a dish that was eaten a lot in the time of Jesus, but also long before that. We remember that in Genesis 25, Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of lentils, and the Bible describes that food as being red. Now, why is that? We believe it's because of the type of lentils that Jacob used to prepare here in Israel at that time, and even to this day. We have brown, green, and reddish lentils, so now we're going to buy these reddish lentils to prepare our first dish, so let's go get them. Wow, look how beautiful this stand is, and what abundance, what a variety of food. Let's go in here so we can see this whole area down here full of grains. And these grains were important because they were relatively cheap and a good source of protein. And here we can already see our red lentils. The price here is 14 shekels per kilo. I want to buy a good amount so we can make a nice stew because it's for me, my husband, and our 2 children. So here we're going to buy, let's say, 1 more to make sure we have a good stew. And now we need to go pay, which is really important. Please, 6 shekels and 40. Thank you so much. Now let's continue shopping. And now everyone, to season our stew back then, they didn't use black pepper or paprika. What did they use for seasoning? They used onions, everyone. But what about those who want to make authentic food at home? They didn't fry the onions to use in the food. Instead, they chopped them and cooked them together with the stew. So we have onions, and in the same way garlic, so onions and garlic. And we have one more seasoning that was used back then and that I also want to use today, and it's right here. What a smell, guys. It's delicious. Here is dill. Dill was used a lot, and I also have cumin and olive oil at home, so I don't need to buy them. And actually, Mateus, when he talks about good seasonings, he mentions dill and cumin. So now let's buy our seasonings, which will be for the stew, and we can also use them for other dishes. Please. So everyone, we already have everything we need for our stew, and now let's move on to the main course.
Behind me are 400 truckloads of Temple Mount soil that were illegally dumped in 1999 like trash. But 2 archaeologists refused to let it disappear. They rescued the soil and created the Temple Mount Sifting Project. Today, over 500,000 artifacts have been recovered. Pottery from Solomon's temple, coins from Jesus' time, pieces of history that were meant to be lost forever. Now you can be part of this rescue mission, get authentic Temple Mount soil delivered to your door, and help keep biblical archaeology alive. Scan the QR code or use the link below.
And the main protein in our meal will be fish, which was the most consumed animal at that time. Even more so in Galilee, which was the center of Jesus' ministry. Remember that some of the apostles, like Peter himself, were fishermen, so they ate a lot of fish. And for people who lived in regions a little farther from the Sea of Galilee or the Mediterranean, like here in the case of Jerusalem, they could eat salted or dried fish. So fish really was an animal that was eaten a lot. Much more, for example, than lamb. Lamb was a much more expensive animal, and that's why the elite maybe had access to it on a daily basis. But ordinary people ate lamb only on festive days, like, for example, during Jewish Passover, when the Passover lamb was sacrificed, and after the sacrifice it was eaten. Cows also existed at that time, but guys, red meat, beef was also very, very expensive, and animals like chicken. Did Jesus and his apostles eat chicken? Maybe, but even if they did, it was really an occasional food. Why? Because chickens, guys, lay eggs, so there was a lot of chicken farming, but mainly because of their eggs. Because if the animal was slaughtered and eaten, you would lose all future egg production. So really, on a daily basis, a traditional meal included fish. And now we're going to buy tilapia, which is one of the most common fish in the Sea of Galilee. So let's go to the fish market. And now we need to talk about the most important food in every biblical meal, which was bread. Yes, our daily bread. It made up a good part of the calories that people consumed in their daily lives. Experts estimate that between 60 and 70% of daily calories could come from bread. Bread was important for the entire population, from the simplest people to the wealthiest. And that's why we see that when Jesus performs miracles and teaches about food, he often uses bread. We have, for example, the miracle of feeding. Jesus will perform the miracle of multiplying food twice, and both times he will multiply bread and fish. And Jesus, when he teaches his disciples to pray, he teaches the Lord's Prayer, and in it it says, "Give us this day our daily bread." We see how bread really was an essential food. It was a matter of daily survival. But at that time, there were two types of bread. There was bread made from barley and bread made from wheat. Bread made from wheat was much better, however, wheat was more expensive. And that's why simpler people ate barley bread every day. In fact, in the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, that was barley bread. Just a fun fact, everyone. Nowadays here at Mahane Yehuda, if we go to buy barley bread or buy barley to grind and make at home, it will be more expensive than wheat. So we see that the roles have reversed. But if we went back to biblical times, really most of the population would only have money to buy barley. And we learn a lot through the Bible. In Matthew chapter 20, the parable of the workers in the vineyard is told, and it says what the wages of those people were. It was 1 denarius per day. And this is very consistent with what we know from archaeological studies. The average annual salary in Judea and Galilee in the first century was between 200 and 300 denarii. So think about it, 1 denarius for a day's work, but how much could you buy with that amount? You could buy 8 kilos of wheat or 12 kilos of barley. But it's not flour, it's grains. So if we take 8 kilos of wheat grains, they still need to be milled and made into bread. And considering that families at that time were large, this amount of wheat or barley would only last a few days. So really a denarius was a wage that most people wouldn't have any money left over to save. They really lived day by day. Mainly also because at that time there wasn't advanced refrigeration like we have today, and there weren't such advanced preservation techniques either. So every day they received their wages. They would buy food little by little and not go to the supermarket once a week to do big shopping. Yes, every day they would buy what they needed. And today we're also going to buy our bread, but not barley bread, which is more expensive nowadays. Instead, we're going to get a good wheat bread together now. To this day, bread remains a very important food throughout all of Israel. And that's why at this and at every market in the country, we see stands like this one, with dozens of types of bread and people leaving with their arms full. And I want to buy some bread here, but whole wheat bread, because back then, white flour like we have today didn't exist. So let's go over there and buy some good bread. The breads from that time were very simple. They were made with flour, water, and salt, not with all the other ingredients we have today. Thank you very much. And now we're missing dessert. But back then there was no refined sugar and not as many sweets as we have today. And yes, ordinary people ate dried fruits for dessert, mainly figs and dates. And my personal preference, and my little son Yair's too, is dates. So let's put them in the cart and look for traditional dried dates. We can see here that there are also several types of dates. My favorite is the majuli, and this one we're buying is Metsuyano. And now that we've bought everything, it's time to catch the bus to go home for the second part of our day. And the best part, let's go. Welcome everyone to my kitchen here in Jerusalem. Let's quickly prepare our food, but without a recipe. Why? Because the Bible never gives us recipes. It either talks about ready-made dishes or ingredients. And now, using the information we have from the Bible, we can reimagine how these dishes were prepared. And starting with our lentil stew a la Jacob and Esau. So, first we have the red lentils, which we add, and then we're going to add the onion and garlic. These ingredients were already widely used in biblical times. In the book of Numbers itself, it says that these were foods considered very good in the land of Egypt. And in this case, they had them in Egypt. They had them here too in Canaan and Israel. And no frying, everyone. Just put it in like this, and we're going to add the water. If you also plan to make this recipe at home, you can chop the onion a little smaller. But what's really important is not to put foods in here that weren't eaten at that time. For example, we talked about tomatoes, potatoes, and corn, but why didn't they eat tomatoes? Why did the apostles and Jesus never eat tomatoes? Because at that time, tomatoes hadn't arrived here in the land of Israel yet, for example, tomatoes and corn. They came from the Americas only in the 16th century, and potatoes arrived here only in the 18th century when people were preparing food. At that time, most people weren't rich like Herodes, who could bring imported things from Asia and Europe. People cooked with the ingredients they could grow here in the land of Israel. And also, depending on the time of year, not all ingredients were available throughout the year. So everyone, today's recipe doesn't use tomatoes, but what we do have here are spices, especially cumin. So we're going to add plenty of cumin here to give it a really special flavor. And we also have salt. Salt, everyone, gives a really special flavor to all food, but it also helped preserve food. They only added a little. Do you know why? Because salt was extremely expensive, so they really couldn't use large amounts of salt. So we're going to add a small amount and now stir it a little to mix the seasonings, and finally we'll add a little bit of olive oil. Today, olive oil is often seen as a pricier, higher quality food. But back then, yes, it was accessible to the whole population, sometimes in greater or lesser amounts. This is actually a friend who lives next to Caesarea. He has an olive orchard. He made the olive oil at his house. So today, I didn't need to buy the oil. And now we take this to the stove and let it cook. Let's go. Come on. Besides the foods that hadn't yet arrived in the land of Israel, there were also forbidden foods. The Bible in Leviticus makes it very clear which animals could and could not be eaten. So, for example, pork is forbidden according to the law of Moses, as well as seafood. And that's why even today in Mahane Yehuda, it is completely forbidden to sell these animals, which are considered unclean in the Old Testament. And that's why we do buy our fish to prepare. And it will be as simple as possible. because at that time fish was usually grilled whole directly over the fire. But here, guys, at home, we're going to make it a little more adapted. So fish fillet, but using only ingredients that already existed at that time and were allowed by the Bible. So guys, a little bit of salt on our fish, and we're going to add olive oil and cilantro. And that's it, guys. Look at our fresh cilantro here. So just put a little bit of cilantro on top. And of course, olive oil on top. For those who like lemon, about the fish, guys, this isn't the recipe to add lemon because there was no lemon here in the land of Israel at that time. So we're going to put it down here in the oven and then we'll keep talking. You can see that there aren't many dishes here. There are just a few, and the food is simple too, but that's the truth. This is how the simple people of Judea and Galilee used to eat. This is how Jesus ate with his disciples. But now we have to answer one more question. What did they drink? I already told you at the beginning that King David, Jesus, and the biblical characters didn't drink coffee because coffee hadn't even arrived in this region yet. It reached the Levant in the 15th or 16th century. So what did people drink? Water. Most of the population drank water, and they also drank wine, but in a different way. They used to dilute the wine, usually 1 part wine to 2 or 3 parts water. So the custom was to drink diluted wine, and we see this in the Bible. We see that the Bible talks about wine in many passages, and often it also specifically mentions diluted wine. In fact, Paul himself tells Timothy to drink diluted wine because of his stomach problems. Do not continue to drink only water. Take a little wine as well because of your stomach and your frequent illnesses. Why is that? Because the water at that time was often not as clean as the water we have today. And that's why mixing wine, which did have some alcohol content, helped make the drink healthier, in quotes, more hygienic for the standards of that time. But when we talk about wine, even though the Bible talks about wine, we have to remember that the Bible clearly condemns drunkenness. Neither thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor slanderers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. We have our food, we have our drink, but there was something missing before any meal. In biblical times, a prayer was said over the bread in Hebrew, and we're going to do it together now. Baruch ata Adonai, Eloheinu melech ha'olam, ha'motzi lechem min ha'aretz. And how was the bread eaten? Let's eat it with zatar azov, which we also know as hyssop. It's also a biblical plant, along with sesame seeds, and olive oil was added. And now we break the bread. I think it's beautiful that we can connect to the Bible and the land of Israel in so many different ways. And I hope you enjoyed connecting with the story of Israel. Through our daily bread, I thank everyone who watched, and I'll see you next week. And be safe and enjoy your meal, everyone.